If you're a Gen X or midlife woman and you often feel like the last woman standing, if you've spent years running on empty while still managing to be the person that everybody else depends upon, then I'm making today's video for you. And I want you to know that I don't think you're tired because you're weak or because you're doing anything wrong, and I certainly don't think that you're a victim. Not at all. But you are exhausted because you learned from your very earliest days to push yourself to your very limit. That has always been normal for us, and it's time we talked about it. Today we're going to look at the real psychology behind why Gen X women burn out and why it's different. We're going to look at 4 things. First, what was going on in the society around you that made you learn to put your own needs last. Second, the specific historical events that made you so attuned to crisis management. Third, the particular burden you're carrying right now. And fourth, almost the most important thing, some practical steps to take to help you through and help you move forward. And to be honest, I don't like drawing uncrossable lines between Generation X and other generations. There will certainly be other generations who've experienced their own versions of the above. But I'm a 1968 Gen Xer. That's the thing I'm most experienced at being. If you identify with what I'm talking about today, then please let me know. I'm talking to you as well. If you're new here, my name's Lucy. I'm so glad you found my channel. I use my 30 years of workplace experience, some of which has been brilliant, others of which has been not so brilliant, to share what I've learned and help people experiencing workplace toxicity and burnout and help you move forward. Thank you so much for watching. So let's crack on. If you're a Generation X woman, that means you were born between 1965 and 1980. And chances are that when you came home from school as a child, no one else was there. This is partly because the divorce rate climbed sharply between the 70s and 80s, and mothers were entering the workforce in numbers that hadn't been seen before. My mother's mother had to leave the workforce when she got married in 1940, but my mum, who was born in 1941, worked. And the result was a whole generation of children who came home from school to an empty house and just got on with it. You might have heard the term latchkey kids, which refers to the fact that children of our generation coming home to an empty home, we had to get into the house, so we either had the house key on a string around our necks or under a plant pot or dangling on a string that you could reach and pull through the letterbox. So that's where that term comes from. Psychologists have got a term for this, which is parentified, which is a kind of role reversal where a child takes on adult levels of responsibility while still being too early in their development to deal with that responsibility. And for a lot of Generation X girls, that wasn't seen as a problem. That was just the way things were at that time. But of course there is a problem, because what you're learning from that very early age is to put other people first, and you're not really ready to take on those levels of responsibility. You are a child yourself, and so that teaches you to be useful, to put others' needs first, to keep yourself safe by being helpful. And this way of living as a child becomes a kind of survival strategy. But I think that living in survival mode is exhausting. And as I've talked about in other videos, when we feel a threat to us and we need to survive, then we go into that fight or flight mode. And so that means you're at a heightened level of adrenaline all the time, and eventually really it catches up with you, and that level of exhaustion is very, very hard to live with. And maybe that's part of why you're feeling so depleted later in life, in later adulthood. But it wasn't only the home environment that was exhausting. There was something going on in the background that might not have been fully in our consciousness, but it shaped you deeply, and that was growing up during the Cold War. Now, I know that that might sound a bit remote and a bit far-fetched, but just to give you a couple of examples from my own childhood, I can remember really clearly in 1979, when I would have been 11, when the Soviet tanks rolled into Afghanistan, and there was a real fear around us that somehow I absorbed, that there was going to be a nuclear war. Not long later, the Chernobyl disaster when I was 17, the HIV and AIDS crisis and the huge existential fear that created. So a number of things going on through that early part of my life that I can remember being a sort of drumbeat of fear. And of course, I'm not saying that we're the only generation that have lived with fear, because clearly in more recent years we've had many, many other things and things going on every day right now that are affecting our, but just to kind of talk about Generation X just for one moment, just to illustrate some of the things that I thought about when I was younger. And when you're a child, you don't have a real ability to talk about these things and express your fears. I do remember talking about them in the playground with my friends, but I can't remember what we really said or anything. But I don't think I was, coming home and feeling like I could get involved in saving the world or anything like that. But I do remember this fear. And when you've got a fear and you've got an anxiety that you don't know really how to express and you don't know how to deal with or live with, then it ends up becoming internalized and you absorb it into yourself. And so I think that growing up under that has had an effect on this generation, and that lives with us today. So I think that this generation developed the ability to live with uncertainty and just get on with things anyway. And I think that shows up all these years later in the way that we behave today. And maybe this is why Gen X women make such exceptional leaders. Our ability to remain calm under pressure, to just get on with things, to not catastrophize, to move forward anyway, is something that I think we recognise as being some of our strengths. But this does come at a cost, because what it means is that we've lived our whole lives with an ability to be scanning for danger whilst just getting on with it anyway. That heightened level of awareness is exhausting. We just keep going, we're scanning for incoming threats, just about managing. And at some point, I think the resilience wears out and we just can't live with that anymore. So you're someone who grew up as a child learning to suppress your own needs, with a nervous system that has learned to deal with crisis without showing any kind of strain. And what's that doing to you today in later life? Now let's look at where you are today. Statistically, there are way more Generation X women in leadership roles than either the older generation or the generations after them. That's just about an accident of timing. So, as I say, my parents' generation was the first generation that women were going out to work. My generation, it was much more normalised, and so many more women entered the workplace. And the generations after us are just younger, so you'll have your time, I promise. But that means that many of us are shouldering the responsibility of very, very senior jobs at the very same time that our own parents are getting older and maybe more frail, and so we're having to care for them. And we're also having to care for our children and our offspring, many of whom, because of economics, aren't able to leave home as early as we would have done. So there's all these sort of pressures, both above us and from underneath, that causes us to be that what's called the sandwich generation, sort of squeezed in the middle. And now I like a bit of a bigger filling in my sandwich, so I don't want us to be squeezed like this. I want us to be able to thrive. But maybe we're not thriving. You know what it's like. People ask you how you are and you say, fine, I'm absolutely fine. It's almost a cliche, but it's what we do. Even when we're absolutely not fine, we say we're fine because we're not even able to admit, to ourselves, let alone other people, that we're not fine. And here's what I want you to think about, is that functioning and fine are not the same thing. And I think at this age, the distance between those two words is becoming wider than it ever was. I spent over 30 years in leadership. I managed crises, I managed people, I led teams, I led change, and sometimes it was really tough. And in the end, I decided that life wasn't for me anymore. Leaving behind my team, leaving behind my identity was really hard. But what I realised was that the just getting on, just saying I was fine, just dealing with the next thing, meant that I was suppressing awareness of what I really wanted. And it took me a long time, firstly, to admit that to myself, and also then to work out what I really wanted, because tuning into that was hard. If that sounds like what you're going through right now, if any of what I've just said resonates, then please know that you're not alone. You've kept going, you've held on to something, you've been responsible, you've done the thing despite all the weight of all of those responsibilities. And I think that's pretty amazing, and you are amazing. And if you're interested in learning more about this topic of Gen X or midlife Burnout. This is the partner video to a video I published a couple of weeks ago about why you're treated differently at work as you age. It's about ageism at work and about being ignored and not taken so seriously. And I'll link to that one above so you can carry on watching. So what do you actually do with all of this? As always in my videos, I want to leave you with some practical things that you can do next. I'm going to give you 4 things to move yourself forward. Number 1 is to name the pattern, because the first step to changing things, as I say over and over again, is to name them and say them out loud. Admit them to yourself. Saying to yourself something like, I was trained from childhood to suppress my needs and to keep going under pressure, is not a therapy statement. It's an accurate description of your history. Try saying it out loud if it makes sense to you. Write it down if it helps, because writing it down gets it out of your subconscious and into your conscious, and is a first step of starting to work with it. That's where change begins. 2, make a distinction between your wiring and your choice. So saying I'm fine is what you were wired to do as a child, but you are not that child anymore. You can choose deliberately and consciously to say something different. You don't necessarily have to go from I'm fine to saying I'm struggling, but you could try saying something like I've had a really full week. So being a bit more honest about what's going on. Try it and see how you get on. 3, protect your energy. Energy is a finite resource, and it's not that high functioning people have any more energy than any of the rest of us. They just keep going on empty. Energy depletes in all of us and it needs replenishment. So be intentional about planning where you spend your energy. What's giving you a boost right now and what's draining you, and try to do more of the former and less of the latter if you possibly can. And the 4th one, which is the hardest for me, I acknowledge, and I don't know if it's hard for you to do too, is to let other people carry some of the weight. Maybe they can help you. I think we learned very early on in our childhood that to be indispensable was to be valued, but being indispensable is not really sustainable because it's exhausting. And we also learned not to ask for help because showing that vulnerability felt unsafe. But the people around you, the people who genuinely care for you, they want the opportunity to show up for you if you'd only let them. So let them. And to be honest, I'm saying this as much to myself as I'm saying it to you, because something that I've always found the hardest to do is to ask for help. As I was writing the script for this video and thinking about the topic, I thought back to my childhood and remembered those days in the playground worrying about nuclear catastrophes. And then I thought about all of us ever since, all my friends and what we've gone on to do. And I think that Generation X are pretty formidable, you know, without trumpeting ourselves and without showing off, because we were always told not to show off. And I'm proud of us. We built organisations, we've led organisations, we've changed the way the workforce works for women and for men. And we are something to be proud of. And these days, all these years later, when we're coming to maybe the close of our working lives, I think the question to ask is who takes care of the people who've always taken care of all of the other people? Who takes care of them? You've spent a lifetime being the foundation, and sometimes foundations need building up and they need tending to. Work, as I always say, should lift us up. It shouldn't wear us down. And life too. Life should lift us up. It shouldn't wear us down. We've only got one life. And maybe that starts with making a decision, a real conscious decision, that you are worth the same care and the same attention that you have given all your life to everyone else, that you deserve that too. A few asks from you. 1, subscribe if you don't already. 2, subscribe to my weekly newsletter, which is where you will be the first to know about my online community when I build it and when I launch it later in the year. And 3, if you're interested in one-to-one coaching with me, my booking form and all the information you need are in the link below in the description. I really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.